exploring the potential of universal basic income where they are. So we were born in 2016 out of a series of events on UBI here in Sheffield, where me and the other sort of founders of the network are based. So many of you will already be familiar with the concept, but what is a universal basic income? The basic idea is that we replace substantial parts of the current welfare system with a monthly payment to everyone, regardless of their wealth, income, or employment status. So it's a non-withdrawable payment, so no one can take it away. It's your right as a citizen and as a resident of whatever country it's implemented in. And everyone receives it, so even the wealthiest receive a UBI, so millionaires, billionaires would receive a UBI, but then they would basically pay back in increased taxes. So they effectively don't get it, and there's a big kind of misunderstanding about UBI, which is that why does it need to go to the very wealthiest? Whereas in effect they would actually pay it back. But obviously, if a millionaire fell on hard times and they lost all their wealth, then they would still receive the UBI. So in effect, it creates a safety floor, an income floor that nobody can fall beneath, in the same way that the NHS creates a health floor that nobody can fall beneath. So there's different kind of competing ideas about where UBI first came from, but it was mentioned, it was central to Thomas More's utopia in the 16th century. So it goes back a long way, and Athens in ancient Greece had a form of UBI for people who attended the I can't remember what the word for it is, the political forum. People received a basic income to participate in that. President Nixon almost brought in a UBI in 1969. So he wanted to introduce a UBI that would have been $10,000 in today's money for a family of four per year, and this almost got passed. And then the Democrats wanted the amount to be much higher, so they scuppered the plan when it got to the Senate, and then it never got off the ground. And then the Republicans kind of moved away from it, and it kind of fell out of favour in the Republican Party. I think that just kind of demonstrates how there's support for this idea on the right and on the left. It's not particularly an idea entirely rooted in kind of one political tradition. There's support for it across the political spectrum. So the most kind of comprehensive pilot that's been undertaken, as far as we're concerned in the kind of UBI movement, is in Finland in 2017 to 2018. So 2,000 unemployed people were randomly selected across Finland. So this wasn't a pilot with general members of the population. This was a pilot with people who were on the Finnish equivalent of job seekers allowance. And the idea was to see whether it made people claiming unemployment benefit more likely to find work. So it wasn't really a pilot in the way that we'd like to see a pilot, where we'd like to test other things, like we'd like to test its effect on poverty or its effect on well-being. But this is still probably the most comprehensive pilot that's taken place so far. So 2,000 people across Finland received a UBI of €560 a month. And there were amazing effects that kind of came out of this. So better physical and mental health. People who received the UBI reported higher confidence in the future compared to those in the control group. Better financial well-being, as you'd expect. And really interestingly, they reported greater trust in institutions and in the state. And with all the stuff we've seen around like Trump and Brexit and sort of fake news, that's a really interesting idea that by receiving this payment, people trusted more in the institutions of the state. And obviously in kind of Britain and America, we've seen trust in the state sort of fall to what feels like an all-time low. The results in more details from the Finnish pilot from Kela, which is the sort of Finnish equivalent of the DWP, and you can see that people receiving a basic income were less likely to report being depressed, and they felt they were in a better financial situation. So more people felt they were living comfortably who received the UBI compared to those in the control group who just received the existing unemployment benefit. But by far and away the most interesting thing about the Finnish pilot is that the recipients of a UBI actually worked more than those who received the traditional JSA equivalent, where they were expected to apply for jobs. So that the people who received the UBI didn't have to fulfill any criteria. They didn't have to apply for jobs or do anything like that. And over the 2-year period, they worked 5 days on average more than those who were subject to the means-tested unemployment payment. So that kind of speaks to a common myth about UBI, which is that if we rolled it out, everyone would give up work. And actually, in the pilots around the world, none of them have shown a significant drop in employment, and actually many of them have shown a small increase in employment, as well as big increases in well-being and other things like that. So probably the only country in the world where a form of UBI is actually in place is in Alaska, in the state of Alaska, where since 1982 they've had a kind of UBI based on oil revenue in the oil industry. So when they found vast oil reserves in Alaska in the late 70s, the state stepped in to put a tax on oil revenues found in the state, and they decided to distribute a portion of that to the residents of Alaska every year in a form of a UBI. So the amount actually differs every year depending on how much oil is found and how much money is made from that oil. So this kind of shows the amount every year, and it differs wildly. So it can be over $2,500, or it can be under $1,000. This is per year, per person, and you have to be a permanent resident of Alaska. So obviously a flaw with this, compared to kind of our idea of a UBI, is that you don't know how much you're going to get. You can't kind of rely on it because it varies so wildly every year. The other problem is that it's obviously based on fossil fuel extraction, which we need to be moving away from. So there's some serious flaws with this, but a kind of really interesting aspect of it is the way that politicians on both sides of the spectrum in Alaska have defended the permanent fund. So even Republicans have stepped in to kind of safeguard the permanent fund when people have made proposals to get rid of it. So recently UBI's probably had the highest profile as an idea it's ever had, thanks to Andrew Yang, who was a candidate for president for the Democrats. And I think he got to kind of the last 6 or 7 candidates. And he had this idea of a freedom dividend. So because it's in America, you have to rebadge it as a freedom dividend. And his proposal was for $1,000 a month for every American adult. So it's about 20-30% more than Nixon's plan. And this got a lot of people in America talking about UBI. And he's now running to be mayor of New York, and is the front runner there, where he said that he wants to do a UBI pilot in New York City. And it's probably his campaign which led to the Trump administration during the pandemic sending out these stimulus checks. So they sent out a number of checks for $1,000 to $2,000 to people on low incomes to kind of stimulate the economy. And that idea almost certainly is a direct result of Andrew Yang's campaign. So how much would a UBI cost in the UK? Because this is something that we kind of constantly run into in the UBI world, is the idea that we can't afford it. Whereas actually, an American economist, who's a bit of a UBI expert, recently did some modelling using all the tax and benefits data for the UK. And he modelled a UBI set at the absolute poverty rate. So it would be £7,706 per adult, £3,853 for children. So that would eliminate absolute poverty altogether in this country because no one could fall below that level. He found that the gross cost, so that's simply the amount of UBI you'd give times the population per year, would be an absolutely enormous £438 billion, which is huge. And critics of UBI will often disingenuously quote that number when making an argument against it. But actually, he found that the net cost, once you take into account all the money you get back through tax, and also all the money you'd save through scrapping large parts of the current welfare system, would only be £67 billion, which is obviously vastly lower. That's around 3.4% of GDP. So you'd be able to sweep away huge parts of the DWP and the means tested benefit system. You'd be able to sweep away so much of the sanctions and the means testing, and a lot of the really quite kind of cruel stuff that we've seen over the last 10 years from the DWP. So you'd be able to completely get rid of job seekers allowance and all the kind of the ritual humiliation that goes with that. So he found this modelling exercise found that this would only add 39% to the cost of the UK's existing benefit system, not including the NHS. So it's not like this trebles or quadruples the cost of the existing benefit system. It's already incredibly expensive to run a means-tested benefit system. And it would only add an extra 8.7% to total government spending. So it's actually not a huge amount in the scheme of things. And it's something that rich countries like the UK, Finland, and the United States, we can actually easily afford this. It's a political choice not to do it. So I'm going to sort of wrap up probably at this point and hand over to Toby to talk about what's been going on in the North East. But I'll just very briefly talk about UBI Lab. So we've got the sort of model of our network is these independent and autonomous groups all over the UK and around Europe and around the world that explore UBI in their areas. So these are all the UBI labs so far, and I think we've actually added 5 or 6 since I wrote this list about 2 weeks ago. And as well as the ones that are based in specific places, we also have sort of identity-based groups. So we have UBI labs that explore how a universal basic income would impact on women, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, and young people. And these groups have been doing some really interesting work, like our Disability Lab has been exploring a model for a form of UBI that would include extra payments for those with disability-related costs. So yeah, some really interesting work going on across our network. I think I'll hand over to Toby at that point, if that's all right. Toby, if you're ready.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, thanks very much well, first of all, just hello everyone. Thanks for inviting us. It's great to see you all. I'm just gonna what have I done here? I'm gonna try and share my screen because I've got a quick presentation. So I'm my name's Toby Lloyd. I'm based in Newcastle, and let's get this working. I'm the co-founder of UBI Lab Northeast and also UBI Lab Arts. One of the reasons I'm based in Newcastle, and that's where most of the stuff we've been doing is, but one of the reasons we're called UBI Lab Northeast is because we didn't want to sort of spur any rivalry between different cities in the northeast. And we thought, something later on which we could try and exploit if we needed to get leverage between, if we could get a sort of a race between Newcastle and Sunderland or Newcastle and Middlesbrough to have a pilot, for example. What I've got up on, can everyone see the presentation? Hopefully this is working. So this is just a UBI Lab Network survey map, which sort of it's an interactive map which is on the website, and there's the address there, and I'll put it in the chat after my presentation. But it's from 2 surveys which were run by the Basic Income Conversation and also Organise, which we did a series of questions which included these 2. What would you do differently if you had a UBI? Which was sort of put out I think it was just at the start of the pandemic. So this is when sort of universal basic income became quite sort of, much more talked about in the media because of the, it's seen as a way of sort of giving everyone a secure safety net during the pandemic when there's so much uncertainty in the labour market particularly. I'll just say for me, one of the things, I see basic income as a way of investing in the population, as a way of investing in everyone, and just sort of, showing that, everyone makes a contribution to society in ways which aren't measured, outside of financial kind of measures. Quite often we just sort of see it in sort of, I go to work and I pay my taxes, and actually, society functions on a lot of unpaid and a lot of unrecognised work and labour, which I think basic income is a way of recognising that. So here are some just sort of responses from the Northeast, and then so I'll just sort of give you a very, I know we're sort of probably running over, and I think actually we'll probably want to get to questions because there's a lot of things which we can't sort of fit into a presentation like this. But I started the lab in November 2019. I think we've had a few sort of online meetings and a few face-to-face meetings before the pandemic, obviously, and so far, it's just been sort of telling people about basic income. So similar kind of meetings to what this one is here at the moment, but we're trying to sort of build a larger network, working with different groups who I would sort of see as allies in the sense that they're trying to sort of social justice movements who are trying to achieve similar things to us. And so if anyone is part of any groups like that or knows any groups like that who would like to get involved and talk to us, please get in touch, and I'll put contact details and social media details up after the presentation. So I'll end quickly just on showing you a couple of cartoons which I've made, which are using responses from that survey map. This is, I'm an artist, and I'm particularly interested in how you communicate ideas like basic income in ways which can hopefully jump some ideological barriers, but also make it, actually connect to human experiences. Because I think the data which Sam showed us earlier on, the graphs from the Finnish trial, I think, obviously show very positive results, but even I find them quite difficult to read. And I'd like to say I'm impartial about basic income, but I'm definitely convinced that it's a good idea. And obviously there's good and bad versions of it. But I think what I was trying to do with these cartoons is a way of relating it to people's real lived experiences and kind of in a ways which people can actually understand. Quite often, I guess the arguments against basic income are things like, it would make everyone lazy. And when you ask someone, if you received the basic income, would you stop working and sit on the sofa all day? And they say, of course not. No, it's just all those other people. And I think that's, understandable to a degree, especially because of the way that people are portrayed in the media. But I think actually, I don't know anyone I've not spoken to anyone who would sit on the sofa and do nothing. I think everyone would benefit from just that sort of basic financial security everyone gives them. And I'll finish on the last point, which I wanted to make, which is that thing where, people say, well, why should we give it to the wealthy? They don't need it and things like that. And, obviously a lot of people don't need it if they've got a sort of a secure job. But, basic income recognises that there can be income inequality within households. So, for example, if if I'm doing a PhD at the moment, so my wife is, earning, she's the breadwinner at the moment, so you could say I'm sort of dependent on her. So, basic income would give people the ability to say no to exploitative relationships and no to exploitative work as well. And I think particularly at the moment, with the pandemic, we're in a situation now where a lot of people are going to have to, when the labour market sort of opens up again, there's going to be, potentially a lot of exploitation happening. I think basic income would give everyone the security and the sort of stability, like Sam said, the sort of a floor which no one would fall below, and also the ability to sort of say no to exploitative work, and we can actually do more, do work which actually benefits everyone. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Looking forward to having a conversation and addressing some of the questions which are coming up in the chat.